Alas, I just posted it on Google Drive this morning. I still have to make the assignment on Canvas. This subject is going to be interesting to talk about, but I might stub my toe a little bit just because there's so many different ways you can think about it, ranging from the more rigid to the more, how can I say it, exploratory maybe. Let's see. So what we're going to talk today about are modes, okay? So modes, I'm recording, right? I think I am, right? Make sure. Okay, looks like I'm recording. All right. Okay, so modes. Technically speaking, a mode is just an inversion of a scale. And you know about chords, they can be inverted, but scales can be inverted too. So I can kind of show you what that looks like. Let's see. Turn up my keyboard right here. Great. You probably hear that? Cool. All right. So what we have here is the following. Okay. These little OCD here, but you have a chord, right? You could invert that, couldn't you? You could actually take the bottom note, whoops, put it on top, right? You can do that. Take the bottom note, put it on top, right? That's totally valid to do, right? Nothing wrong with that. But what if you took a scale? In fact, let me do this. It's not that. Not that. What if I took a scale like this and I just inverted it? So for one, I can actually take this entire scale and I can think about it like this. I could think about it like this. Looking for the correct note head for this. This is basically a double whole note, in case anyone's wondering. Right? These are all these pitches of this scale, but organized in a way where it's just one harmonic incidence, where it's basically one chord, right? So if I wanted to, I could actually invert this. I could take the bottom note of this chord and do that. That doesn't look, whoops, I guess I would do this. Well, let's ignore the top note for a second. Okay? I'm going to get rid of the top note. Right? Do you see what's happening? I'm basically taking the bottom note and putting it on top. In some ways, that's inverting the entire scale. Okay? I could do that again. Right? I could keep doing this, I guess, 7 times, I think. And then, let's see. And eventually, I would get back to this, again, just an octave higher, right? That should more or less make sense, right? So what I'm really doing when I'm inverting these scales is I'm accessing the different modes of the scale, okay? So this is like the most classic way to think about this. So let me make this a little bigger. Okay, so I've kind of color-coded this for you guys. What you have here, gosh, this around. Okay. Okay. So what you have here basically is the C major scale, right? And these are all different colors depending on the notes of the scale, right? Now, if you invert these scales such that the colored notes are basically the starting note of the scale, you arrive at the different modes of the scale. So for instance, if D is the starting note of the C major scale, you get the Dorian mode. Okay, so this is a C major scale. Right, that's what I just played over here. Then over here, I'm going to play the Dorian mode. Okay? So this is the C major scale just inverted once, right? Now, if I choose my starting note to be this pink note right here, in other words, if I invert the scale twice, I get the E Phrygian mode. Okay? If I invert it one more time, I get the F Lydian mode. Okay? If I invert it one more time, I get the G Mixolydian mode. And if I invert it one more time, I get the A Aeolian mode. Okay? And I invert it one last time, I get the B Locrian mode. Okay? So, for one thing, these are all a lot of names, right? There's a lot of names here, but I guess what I want you to get used to start off with, is that you don't have to necessarily stick to the C major scale. You could apply this to different scales. The first inversion of a major scale is always going to be a Dorian mode. Okay? So remember, a mode is really, in a very simple manner, just an inversion of a scale. So scales and modes are in some ways interchangeable, because you can actually consider this as a combination of half steps and whole steps in some ways, right? So, but the usefulness of this extends beyond, well, there are differences between scales and modes, okay? I guess one way that you can kind of think about modes is that they're organized in such a way where different modes relate to each other. For instance, the D Dorian mode relates to the E Phrygian mode. They all fit into this thing called the C major scale. So here's an idea I want you to kind of get your head around, okay? This, sorry, there's, so I want you to understand this idea of a parent scale, okay? So this is the parent scale. The C major scale is the parent scale. All of these different modes are sort of subordinate in some ways. In one way of thinking about it, they're sort of not as significant as the C major scale. That's sort of like, you can kind of think about the C major scale as being the root position in some way of this scale, right? And if you invert it, you get these different modes, okay? So the C major scale is, you know, in jazz terminology, they call this a parent scale. And then you can derive all these modes just by inverting this parent scale, okay? So I could have stopped here, but there's actually a very, very deep, there's a lot of deep things to say about this. There's also a lot of mundane stuff that you're going to have to learn how to do. For instance, on the homework, you're going to have to basically figure out the parent scale of any mode that I give you. And there's a process for doing that. Okay, there's so much stuff to say. I guess I'll back up and say a couple of things, just to recap. So, to expand to reiterate, chords, scales can be inverted just like chords. And just like chords have a root position, modes can be organized according to a parent scale. Okay? And the parent scale can be thought of as the root position of the mode. Okay? But there are some differences. The root of a chord feels like the most important note of a chord, whereas the parent scale concept is just a way of relating similar modes. So to elaborate on that, the tonic of a piece might not be the starting note of a parent scale, but might be the starting note of the mode. So tonic is another concept. Tonic is like what feels like home to you, okay? Now, in a very rigid way of thinking, people might conflate tonic with the parent scale, but that's not really giving justice to the full capability of the modes. The real power of the modes lies in treating each one as a scale, ultimately, like as an own thing, as not as a subset, but rather as its own kind of entity. It's convenient to kind of classify modes as being as part of a set of part of a parent scale because you can kind of classify them. But that only is useful to some degree. At some level, you could actually build a piece in D Dorian mode, and D could be the tonic of the piece. So for instance, Greensleeves. Right? So we'll definitely talk more about this. Now, modal chord progressions are a good example of this, and that's basically they're chord progressions that characterize the mode in some way. Okay. So I guess let's just talk about what it means to characterize the mode. So there are certain characteristic tones in each mode that kind of make them sound like that mode. We've talked a lot about the different minor scales, right? We've talked about basically where can we find that? We talked about C major, C natural minor, right? We talked about how you can flat certain scale degrees, and that gives the characteristic sounds of these different minor scales, right? If you flat the 3, the 6, and the 7, what scale are we talking about?
Natural minor.
Natural minor. If we flat the 3 and the 6, what scale are we talking about?
Harmonic minor.
Harmonic minor. Great. If we flat to just the 3 relative to major, what are we talking about?
Melodic minor.
Melodic minor. Ascending melodic minor. Exactly. So similarly, modes, if you kind of think of them as their own scales, which there's really no reason you can't think of them in that way, they have their own characteristic tones. And Dorian mode is actually a new kind of minor that we haven't talked about. Because we've talked about all these different permutations, about 3, 6, 7, right? Those numbers are on my license plate. And those are like characteristic tones of minor scales. And I can always remember them because of that. It's my own version of a vanity plate, an unintentional vanity plate. Now, we've talked about if you flat the 3, you get ascending melodic minor, right? If you flat the 3 and the 7, you get, well, we haven't talked about that possibility. We've talked about if you flat the 3, the 6, and the 7, you get natural minor, right? If you flat the 3 and the 6, you get harmonic minor. But what happens if you flat the 3 and the 7? Well, check it out. You actually get the Dorian mode. If you flat the 3 and the 7, you get the Dorian mode. We've left this out for so long. Dorian is actually possibly the oldest scale in existence, the oldest mode in the West. It's interesting because it's actually symmetrical. So it's the same going up and going down in terms of its half-step, whole-step properties. That's a whole other discussion, but it's interesting. I mean, in other words, we can classify all these modes as having certain intervallic combinations. So D to E would be whole step. E to F would be, I don't like how these boxes are so wide, but I guess I can do this. E to F would be a half step, right? F to G would be a whole step. G to A would be a whole step. A to B is going to be, gosh, a whole step. B to C is going to be half step. And a C to D would be a whole step. So it just happens to be that if you have a start right here, start, whole, half, whole, half, whole. It's the same forwards and backwards. Start, whole, half, whole, half, whole. That's interesting. That's one of the unique scales in that regard. There's not many scales that have that property. But one important aspect of the scale is, and again, I'm kind of using scale and mode interchangeably because you could think about, one way to think about modes is as subsets of a parent scale, but ultimately they are scales in their own accord. It's somewhat arbitrary which scale you call the parent scale, right? Like what's stopping me from calling this mode the parent scale? There's not really anything, right? I could call, this could be the basis, like this could be the parent scale and this could be the inversion of this, right? But it just happens to be that there are certain parent scales that we have decided upon as being sort of root position, if you will. And that is completely arbitrary.
So,
but, yeah.
So are you saying that, what are you saying is flat 3 and flat 7 from the, are you saying that's from the C major scale?
Yes, that's in reference to the C major scale. And actually, if you in reference, okay, so it's also useful to think about it in terms of the natural minor. It's a natural 6 when compared to a natural minor. But in reference to major. Right. Yes, that's a great question.
So you're saying in the C major scale, you're saying that E is flat?
Yes. In the C major scale, I'm saying that E is flat. So we can actually look at that in Sibelius. So give me one sec. No. I'll live with this. Okay. So if we have this, right, and if we flat the 3 and we flat the 7, we have Dorian mode. So, in fact, I think I have a chart somewhere else, and my friends okay, actually, it might be useful to think about. I did make this a while back. I think it's somewhere here. It basically shows the, well, it's not that important. I guess we can develop this together. So if you flat the 3 and flat the 7, you get Dorian mode. If you flat the 2, the 3, the 6, and the 7, you get Phrygian mode. In other words, if you have natural minor, right, because it's flat 3, flat 6, flat 7, and you add in a flat 2, you have a Phrygian mode, or a Phrygian scale. So in this particular case, the most characteristic, I'm going to bolden the most characteristic notes, scale degrees of the scale. In Dorian, because 6 is at odds, like this is almost natural minor, so we're kind of referencing natural minor here. Because this is natural minor, but we have a raised 6, the 6th scale degree is like the characteristic tone of this mode. It's like what kind of defines this mode. If you're trying to really accentuate this mode, like for instance in Greensleeves, right? If I write that melody out right here, 1, 2, 3. Okay, I guess it's in 3, 4. So if I go 1, 2, 1, 2. So I have to think about this. Right? Da, 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 da. Now, if I put the scale degrees here, what I have is 1. What do I have? 3, 4, 5, 6, 5. Right? These are the scale degrees without talking about whether they're flat or sharp in relation to major, right? But in natural minor, I guess we can write this in solfege, right? Let's write this in solfege because this will allow us to modify the symbols. Well, actually, I'll do it 2 ways. Sorry, give me 1 second. Let me figure out how to. I forgot an important shortcut. Okay. Great. Nice. So, come on, Sibelius. Cooperate, please. Okay. So what we have here is the melody to Greensleeves. And I'm going to write it in using scale degree numbers. Okay, agnostic to any kind of flats or sharps. Now I'm gonna write them in reference to what the scale degrees are in major. So this is 1 flat 3, 4, 5, 6, 5. Right. This is in reference to major. Now I'm going to write it in as solfege.
But for the examples, and like, how is it flat if there's no accidental at all? It's not really.
Well, this is in reference to the major scale. So in reference scale degrees in reference to major scale. So for instance, if I were to do this in major, right, it would sound considerably different. Like there's no key signature here, but if I were to do this, it would sound happy. Right? But if I did this, these scale degrees are in reference to the major scale. In fact, I'm going to get rid of this. This is just, these are scale degrees without any kind of precise reference to either major or minor. So to not confuse you, I'll get rid of this. These scale degrees are in reference to the major scale. So this is how it would sound if it was totally vanilla in major. Sounds totally different, right? It's fun to move. It's fun to change pieces from their parallel minor to their parallel major. But this is in minor because it's flat 3. It's right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So like on one note, like the page you just showing us, where are the accidentals?
Okay, so this is an interesting. Okay, I'm glad you asked a very good question. I had another. So I had to teach this in the context of another class, and I had a second write-up of this prepared. Let me actually open this up. I think I'm going to open something that I think will make it easier for you to understand this. Okay, it's this document right here. Let me actually remove the hidden stabs. Okay. So these are all the okay. Sorry, I'm being a little neurotic here. These are all the diatonic modes starting on C. Okay? So in other words, there's two ways you can kind of visualize these modes. You might find it more useful to sort of think about these modes in terms of like, well, if you start on C, how would these modes look, right? Because you can kind of easily see the flats, right? So this is Ionian, right? This is Dorian starting on C, and you can see that as a flat 3 and a flat 7, right? This is Phrygian, okay? And you can see that has a flat 2, a flat 3, a flat 6, and a flat 7, right? Lydian has a sharp 4 for these cautionary accidentals. Mixolydian has a flat 7. Aeolian has a flat 3, a flat 6, and a flat 7. And Locrian has a flat 2, a flat 3, a flat 5, a flat 6, and a flat 7. Okay? Now, this is one way of visualizing it. Yeah, and I don't know how to, I'm sorry, Juishan? I'm sorry, I'm not correctly pronouncing your name. He made a good comment in the chat. This is an alternative way to kind of look at the modes. You're not looking at them all starting on the same pitch. You're just looking at them as inversions of the scale. So in other words, you don't see exactly what Jushan said. You don't actually see the accidentals because they're all these modes fit into the key that we're in, right? We're in the key of C major, which the key signature really communicates the parent scale. Okay? That's an important aspect. Most often, there are two actually ways to go about it. The key signature most often communicates the parent scale. Okay? So actually, if you want to expose like the fact that this is flat 3 and flat 7, you'd have to relate this against D major. So if this was in D major, what you'd see is a sharp here and a sharp here. And what you're doing is essentially, you're just, oh gosh, you're just getting rid of the sharp, right? Because you're flatting the 3 and you're flatting the 7. Make sense? With Frid,
I'm still confused. Like, if we're looking at it from a C major scale, why would we be comparing it to a D major scale? Like, why? Like, I'm just confused as if there's a flat 3, then why wouldn't it be an E flat on the D Dorian mode that we can see?
If it's a flat 3, why wouldn't it be an F?
We were saying it's flat 3 and flat 7 of just like the natural parent scale, which would be C major. Then where's the flat 3 and flat 7?
No, it's flat 3 and flat 7 in relation to the parallel major. So like this mode right here, if you compare this D Dorian mode, which is like really a D minor scale, with its parallel major, which is D major, like okay, so I'm going to draw out a D major scale. So this is a D major scale, right? So the flat 3 and the flat 7 is in relation to a major scale built on this starting note. So it's not in relation to the parent scale. All this is just related to the parent scale by the fact that it's inverted. It's the parent scale inverted. But it has a flat 3 and a flat 7 by the standpoint that if you were to make this a major scale, do you agree that this is how you would write this as a D major scale?
Yes.
So if you were to write this as a D major scale and you were to flat in relation, so I'm going to get rid of the sharps by by getting rid of the sharps, I'm flatting them, right? Now I'm left with D Dorian mode. That's another way of getting to that same conclusion, right? You could either, okay, there's two ways to get to it. You could either literally build a D major scale and then flat the 3 and flat the 7, or you could start with a C major scale and invert it. Those are two equivalent ways of getting to that same thing. I know it's a little confusing. So actually, both methods are going to be tested on for your homework. So in other words, there's something. I'm going to go on to the next slide. because there's actually something, I think some of this stuff will be clarified, hopefully, or not less confused. Maybe you'll get more confused, but hopefully you'll get some clarification. We can generalize the modes as being, like, I want to back up for a second. So hopefully you can understand that really in this way, if I'm thinking about sharp, like flat 3 and flat 7, I'm just really, it's like basically a scale formula. That's like the way you've thought about scales in the past, right? That's nothing new, right? Flat 3, flat 6, flat 7. Instead of flat 3, 6, 6, 7, I'm just flatting the 3 and flatting the 7, right? This idea of modes is new from the idea that you're inverting a scale. That's like a new concept, right? The idea that you can actually invert the scale, meaning I'm just shifting the scale. Do you see that I'm shifting the scale by a different note? Like instead of starting on this black note, I'm starting on this orange note, and I'm just using the same notes of the scale, and I'm getting a different mode, right? Now, there's this idea that these inversions have names, okay? So it just turns out to be that if you're in a major scale and you're in root position, that mode that we've learned as the major scale is also called the Ionian mode. In other words, there's no difference between the C major scale and the C Ionian mode. They're exactly the same. It's just, this has a Greek name which references the idea that it's a mode, but they're the same exact formulas. A major scale and an Ionian mode are exactly the same, okay? Now, look at this. So I wrote the notes of the C major scale in green, okay? C, D, E, F, G, A, B, right? If I am starting on the note C, I get the Ionian mode. I get the C Ionian mode. If I'm starting on the note D, I get the D Dorian mode, okay? If I'm starting on the note E, I get the E Phrygian mode. If I'm starting on the note F, I get the F Lydian mode. If I'm starting on the note G, I get the G, oh gosh. It's been wrong for another class I was teaching. I get the G Mixolydian mode. Right? If I start on the note A, I get the A Aeolian mode. If I start on the note B, I get the B Locrian mode. Now this is it doesn't matter which scale I'm in. The first mode will always be Ionian. It doesn't matter which major scale I'm in. The first mode will be Ionian, the second mode will be Dorian, the third mode will be Phrygian, fourth will be Lydian. I actually made some charts to show this. In case like the homework's really hard for you and you can't figure out the process for finding these modes, I have this document here. What I'm basically saying is this. These are the modes of the C major scale: Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian. Let's look at the modes of the C sharp major scale: Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian. Let's look at the modes of the D flat major scale: Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian. They're the same exact ordering of these modes. The only difference is, instead of C Ionian, you would substitute the notes of the scale that you're in. So let's say we're in the key of G major. The G major is the parent scale. Okay? I'm just going to write the notes of the G major scale here, okay? G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. Okay? So let's substitute all of these letters, G. I'm just going to say the first mode of the G major scale is G Ionian. The second mode of the G major scale is A Dorian. The third mode of the G major scale is B Phrygian. The fourth mode of the G major scale is C Lydian, right? The fifth mode of the G major scale is D Mixolydian. The sixth mode of the G major scale is E Aeolian. The seventh mode a G major scale is F sharp Locrian. Okay? I want to generalize. The first mode of any major scale is Ionian. The second mode of any major scale is Dorian. Third mode of any major scale is Phrygian, etc. Okay?
Does that mean that then when you're making like the Dorian and other scales, like for instance for the Dorian scale, based off of just like a Ionian of G major, would you basically flat like the 3 and the 7 in relation to the A major scale?
If you're trying to accomplish a Dorian, is that your question? Or were you trying to what mode are you trying to accomplish?
I mean, like, okay, so I forget what the flat or the accidentals are for each one. So say you're just doing like the G scale, then are you basing the flats, like whatever rules you assign to each one, do you base it off like what the major scale of each letter is? So B, would you take the flats or sharps, whatever it is, and would you apply it to the B major scale?
You could do it that way. Absolutely. Unfortunately, that's not going to help you for some of the homework problems. I'll tell you why.
Yeah, can we do some example problems, please? Sure.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I haven't told you everything I need to tell you. I haven't taught you everything I need to tell you before we get to the example problem. I'll show you what I mean. I still have some stuff to explain to you. So this is an example problem. You're given a mode, and I'm asking you to compute the parent scale, and as well as another mode. Okay, in the scale. Okay, I made a web game for this to actually quiz you. So there's infinite problems there, but I'll give you an example again. So one of the key we're given the mode D Dorian, and we have to figure out what parent scale that fits into. Remember, every single mode fits into a parent scale, right? It's a mode is an inversion of a parent scale. We're trying to basically find the root position of that scale, which is the parent scale itself, right? So how do you do that? So let's say I give you F Lydian. I'll give you one that's actually on this chart so it'll be easier to understand. So this is how you do it. I'm giving you F Lydian, and you're trying to find the parent scale for F Lydian. What you'd have to know is you'd have to know the starting note of the mode, the interval between the starting note of the mode and the starting note of the parent scale. I have to figure out, you know what, let me turn off. Are you guys seeing your copies of yourself, like your video on screen? You're not? Okay, so I'm not blocking out stuff right now. Like I'm not blocking out, you don't see anything like this? Okay, interesting. It shows up on the actual video recordings when I put them on YouTube for some reason. Okay, well anyway, so back to the original problem. You're given F Lydian. You're asked what the parent scale of F Lydian mode is. Okay? So in order to do that, you have to know the interval between the starting note of the mode and the starting note of the parent scale. Okay? So here's what that means. The interval between the starting note of F Lydian, the starting note of the Lydian mode is a perfect fourth above the starting note of the scale, of the parent scale, right? Because Lydian starts on the fourth, it's the fourth mode, and it basically starts a perfect fourth above the root of the scale, above the starting note of the scale, of the parent scale, right? So again, you need the interval between the starting note of the mode and the starting note of the parent scale. So Lydian, by definition, will always be a perfect fourth above the starting note of its parent to major scale. Okay? So then I guess the second step is, well, what is that interval? It's a perfect fourth above the root. So I guess I'll write it like this. Actually, I actually have a quiz that'll exactly answer these questions, prompt you these questions in the exact order on the web, and I'll show you in a second. So F Lydian mode is a perfect fourth above, the starting note of Lydian mode is a perfect fourth above the starting note of its major parent scale. Okay? So what is a perfect fourth below F?
C.
C. Okay? So the answer is C major is the parent scale of F Lydian mode. Okay? What's another mode in C? What's another mode? I guess the question the homework asks you for another mode, right? Well, you can basically figure that out by, well, what are the notes of the C major scale? C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. If you build a scale on the second, if you invert it once, you get D Dorian. If you invert it twice, you get E Phrygian. If you invert it 3 times, you get F Lydian, which we already know about. If you invert it again, you get G Mixolydian. Anyway, I'm going to actually show you my quiz website on MIDI Maze. Okay, so it prompts you with a certain number of questions. So let's do one. What is the intervallic distance between the starting note of the Locrian mode and the starting note of its major parent scale? Well, it looks like it's a major seventh by definition, right? So let's type in major seventh. What is a major seventh below, or a minor second above, the starting note of E Locrian? In other words, what's a major seventh below E?
F.
Correct, I think. What is the parent scale of E Locrian mode?
F major.
What is another mode that you'll know you did it correctly if the fourth question actually gives you the answer? What is another mode that exists in the F major scale? Well, remember, these are the notes of the F major scale. If I build a scale starting on G,
Dorian.
would be G Dorian. That's one example, right? 404 correctly, and then it shows you basically the mode. So E Locrian mode versus the F major parent scale. And you can actually see how this is an inversion of this, right? They both have the same amount of flats, right? So you can kind of see how this is just basically an inverted form of this, right? That's ultimately true, right? That tells you all the questions and answers, right? So you want to do another one? Let's do another one. I think this, yeah, I haven't seen this kind of quiz anywhere else, so take advantage of it. I think this is the framework to kind of answer these questions. So it's a little spoon-feedy, but I think it's good. So what is the intervallic distance between the starting note of the Locrian? We already did this. Okay. Well, we know it's a major seventh, right? Okay, what is a major seventh below or a minor second above the starting note of E flat Locrian? What's a major seventh below E flat?
F flat.
F flat, right. What is the parent scale of E flat Locrian mode? This is ugly, but F flat major. Right, that it's very spoon-feedy. What is another mode that exists in the F flat major scale? Well, let's write the F flat major scale. I'm just going to first write the F major scale. And then I'm just going to flat everything. Right. Incidentally, if things are... E flat Phrygian. Oh, would you say E flat what?
A flat Phrygian.
A flat Phrygian. It works out. By the way, I want to say, if things are kind of small on your end, sorry, my web interface doesn't allow me to zoom in a little more, you can actually click zoom. Like on the drop down at the top under view options, you can actually zoom to like 300%, and it'll actually follow my cursor wherever you go. Or you can go to 100% because my screen is big and it'll just hone in to where my mouse is. So yeah, so A flat Phrygian works. What's another mode that we could use? So remember, I'm just going to copy this over here so you can reference these. These are the notes of the E flat, sorry, the F flat major scale. And remember, if you built the mode off this note, the mode starting on this, built on this note, is going to be Dorian. The mode starting on this note is going to be Phrygian. The mode starting on this note is going to be Lydian. So give me an answer. Like, what are some modes that exist from this scale?
How about B double flat Lydian?
B double flat Lydian is totally correct. And I heard someone else say something. What were you going to say?
D flat Aeolian.
D flat Aeolian. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. D flat Aeolian. Good. What's another one?
F flat Ionian.
F flat Ionian. That's a good one too. Okay. So, it's funny. I prepared so much other stuff, but this concept is so deep that actually I didn't even show you the other stuff I prepared. This stuff I actually prepared for another class I was teaching beforehand, and I was like, oh, they're gonna get this, but it's actually very it's confusing, right? It's very, very confusing. But there's so many interesting applications to this. We can always talk about it next class, but I think it might be good to just hone in on this aspect of it because it is confusing. What's confusing is the fact that you can approach a mode in two different ways. You can approach a mode by thinking about it in this way, where you're like, I'm going to treat the starting note of each mode as a major scale, and then I'm going to make the accidental accommodations, right? And accidentalize the scale so that it's basically fits the definition of the mode. So, for instance, if I'm given, in other words, I can find out D Dorian. What the notes of D Dorian mode are, just by building a D major scale and flatting the 3 and flatting the 7, right? That's one way you can do it. The other way you can do it is by finding the parent scale that mode exists in, and that's what this is trying to show you. It's trying to show you that D Dorian modes actually belongs into the set of modes. As a result, you can use that information. Since everyone really kind of, maybe hopefully by now, knows the major scale pretty well in all these different keys by doing key signature exercises over and over again, week after week after week, right? The hope is that you can kind of relate these modes back to the major scale that these modes correlate to, and you have another means of accessing that information. So, I think the idea of a parent scale is used in the jazz context. In fact, someone might give you like F Phrygian mode, and you're like, gosh, I can't think about that off the top of my head very easily. Like, it doesn't. You might access it two different ways. You might be like, you might unpack that into. Let's see. I'll just create a new thing. F Phrygian mode, right? You might be like, well, I'm going to very quickly unpack that. I'm going to be like, I'm going to build an F major scale, and then I'm going to flat the 2, and I'm going to flat the 3, and I'm going to flat the 6, and I'm going to flat the 7. That's one way you could do it. That's perfectly valid, right? You did the thing correctly, right? Or you could be like, F Phrygian mode, what's that? You could say, well, does this fit into a major scale that I know? In other words, is there a major scale that only has one flat in it? No, I'm doing it wrong. I'm sorry. Is there a major scale that has the same key signature as F Phrygian mode? And then you could think, well, we can go through this process, the process of the game, which is, I guess it's 4 steps. I actually, the 4 steps in that game are this. Let me create a new page. I actually had this in my other class really quickly. Let me see if I can actually see. Okay, I guess the 4 steps, if you're trying to figure out the parent scale, are what is the intervallic distance between the starting note of the mode and the starting note of its major, in this case, major parent scale. Steps in finding parent scale of mode. Okay. Find the intervallic distance between the starting node of the mode and the starting node of its major parent scale. And I guess travel that intervallic distance, and you, I guess this is the only step. You find the intervallic distance between the starting note of the mode and the starting note of its major parent scale. You travel that intervallic distance, and you result in the parent scale. So an example. D flat Locrian. It's useful. It's also useful to think about, okay, it's really useful to think about the parent scale concept, because then you, by doing it in this way, you also figure out all the other modes. So you might be able to jump between the other modes of the parent scale rather than just knowing that mode that you're in. Ultimately, the thought process is to expand your possibilities. You can access this information in multiple ways, but let's look at an example using this strategy, finding the parent scale of the mode. So D flat Locrian. What is the intervallic distance between the starting note of the mode and the starting note of its major parent scale? This doesn't matter. This is agnostic to the root of this, the starting node of the mode. This is just, you just have to look at the quality of the mode for this, right? So what is the intervallic distance between the starting note of the Locrian mode, any Locrian mode, and the starting note of its parent scale? I think we've done this one a couple of times. That is a major seventh. One. Major seventh. So what is a major seventh below D flat?
Is it E double flat?
You know, I haven't figured it out myself. Let me see. I think so. Yeah, because E flat would yield D, so E double flat would yield D flat. So it turns out that the parent scale of D flat Locrian is E double flat major. Ooh, that's very fun, isn't it? So you can use this knowledge to figure out, because once you found the parent scale, you can quickly identify other modes in that scale, right? So then you can kind of, and another mode that you can find, this is basically a strategy for what your homework is asking, is the following. I guess it would be, well, what could it be? Well, what is the E double flat major scale? Let's do it. E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C, D, E flat. Just double flat everything, or add flats to everything. Okay. Oh, this is a great example. So ugly. Okay. So what do we have here? We have, if we start this, the mode that is implied by this note is E double flat Ionian. The mode that is implied by this note is F flat Dorian. The mode that is implied by this note is G flat. What is it? What is the third mode? In fact, let's practice saying all the modes in order. So everyone say it with me. 2, ready, go. Ionian, Dorian, in fact, hold up your fingers so you know. 1 for Ionian, 2 for Dorian, 3. Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian. One more time for good luck. Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian. Okay? Memorize that. There are some interesting ways you can remember this. If you're thinking about C major scale, I kind of remember D for Dorian, right? I'm basing it, C major scale is the easiest thing for me to think about. So D for Dorian, A for Aeolian, right? In fact, Aeolian is just natural minor, if you were wondering. I guess I think of F for Lydian because Fa and, well, it's probably not gonna help you, but Fa in fixed Do is F, so Fa F Lydian. But wait, does that help at all? No, it doesn't. I think I've made this logical error before. I don't know why I remember it as Lydian. But anyway, you have to remember these modes, because if you remember the order of modes, it's really easy to calculate the interval. You might think that I'm pulling these intervals out of thin air, but I'm really not. All these intervals are the distance between the note of the scale at that point from the starting note of the scale, right? So if you remember the order of modes, you can just calculate these intervals very easily, right? Because, in other words, the second note of a major scale, the intervallic distance between the second note of a major scale and the first note of a major scale is a major second. The distance between the third note of the major scale and the first note of the major scale is a major third. Similarly, the distance, the third mode is just, it's basically starting a major third above the first mode, right? It's sequenced. I guess it's sequenced up through the scale. The mode, you're basically like sequencing the scale to get the different modes. You're transposing. No, you're not transposing. You're sequencing or you're inverting, essentially. Anyway, this is a lot to think about, but here's some good news. Because I have this chart here of every single mode that you're going to encounter, you can easily check your work, right? Because I wrote every single scale here. What I did here was, well, for one, I think that thought process will take my quiz on MIDI maze. It's there. But, you could check your work. Originally, I was going to share the PDF with you, but then I was like, nah, I don't want you to like search and just find it, because you'll easily find the answer that way, and then you're not doing any work. So I excluded the PDF, so you can't actually search C Ionian and be like, oh, there it is. It's in the modes of the C major scale. Or you couldn't just search E sharp Phrygian and be like, yeah, it'll just show up in your PDF as being part of the C sharp major scale. What I'm getting at, though, is like if you're asked the question, what parent scale does the mode belong to, it's going to be the big heading of each of the pages. It'll basically be, if you're trying to find the mode that D sharp Dorian belongs to, the answer is C sharp major scale. So if you calculated this correctly, you can refer to this chart and look for the C sharp major scale, and D sharp Dorian should belong in there. And then you should also be able to find the other mode. If you got the other mode from that scale correct, it should also belong in there. So you can check your work by just going through. The alternative, really like painful way of doing this would be like literally like looking through every single scale and being like, oh, I'm going to look for E flat Dorian in this gigantic PDF document. Where is it? Oh, yeah, okay, here it is. Okay, it's part of the D sharp major scale. rather than doing that, I would suggest you use the thought process that I provided here, which I guess I can consolidate these two documents. Okay, so steps for finding. I think it's actually not broken in Safari anymore. Okay. Okay. So anyway, hopefully that is a good reference for you to use. I really over-prepared material today, so we'll talk a lot about the stuff next class. Because like a classical musician might stop here, but it's sort of doing a disservice to the real beauty of the modes. The real beauty of the modes is the idea of these characteristic intervals. Because these characteristic intervals really give a mode a sound. So you can actually build, there's many ways to characterize these intervals in your music. You might characterize the intervals by using a specific chord. So for instance, I could, in fact, this is probably worth making a new document about, because I want to assemble this knowledge for my own sake. So let's take a look at basically, let's try to characterize some of these modes using only 3 notes, okay? Using chords. So what we can do is, let's say we're trying to characterize the Lydian mode. Well, what is the characteristic tone of the Lydian mode? What is the most characteristic tone of the Lydian mode? Let me go back and bolden those. In fact, I actually wrote them out for every single one over here. Like every single one of these has the characteristic tones, but I just want to reiterate which ones are the most significant. The most characteristic tone of Lydian is the sharp 4. That's what really separates it. In fact, of all the modes, it's actually the brightest sounding. You could actually consider, in some ways, the Lydian mode as, you would have an argument to make the Lydian mode the parent scale instead of the Ionian mode, because it's the only mode that's sharped. All the other modes are flatted in relation to the major scale. So actually, in relation to the major scale. So if right now we're considering the major scale as the reference point, but if we considered the Lydian mode as the reference point, all of the modes would be flat in relation to the Lydian mode. So there's an argument that Lydian should really be the parent scale, but we don't do that in the West for whatever reason. I do have other things to say about the importance of the Lydian mode. It's actually, when you look at Indian scales, we'll talk about this next class. There's an entire classification that basically segregates scales according to whether they're Lydian or not Lydian, whether they have the sharp 4 scale degree or whether they don't have the sharp 4 scale degree. In other words, all of the scales on the left hand, this half left column, have the regular 4th scale degree. All of the scales on this side are exactly identical to the scales on this side, except they all have the sharp 4th scale degree. So this idea of this Lydian mode, this sharp 4th scale degree, is a very significant characteristic that other cultures have picked up on and made a very essential portion of the culture of music. So the sharp 4 scale degree, it manifests in so many different areas. In The Simpsons, right, it has that Lydian sound. It's very expansive sounding. Funny story, the composer Prokofiev didn't know about key signatures and all this stuff when he was a little kid. And he was the first piece he ever wrote was an F Lydian, because he was afraid of black keys, and he wanted to create a piece that started on F. So he wrote a piece that had that sharp 4, because he didn't understand that you could actually create a major scale starting on F. He was like, well, I want to use F as my starting note, and I guess I just have to adhere to all the intervals that go along with it. So Lydian. So you could have a voicing like this. Ooh, is it not picking up that USB? Let me check my settings really quickly, so I can type these things in. Not that I need to. Oh, there we go. Yeah, there we go. Awesome. So if we're starting on C, this is a way, I'll do it like this. Right? This is the Maria chord. Whoops. Have you seen Maria? Have you obviously maybe you haven't seen Maria in real life, but you've seen West Side Story. It starts out with Maria. It starts out with that tritone, very characteristic. So if you were to condense that into a chord, it has a very Lydian sound. Or if you were to examine the notes in that melody, it has a very Lydian sound because of this sharp 4, right? So, in fact, there's a teacher at SDSU who was before I tell you that, I'll just let's think about Phrygian really quickly. Phrygian, what's a very characteristic tone of Phrygian? Let me highlight these notes again. Phrygian, it has all these scale degrees: the flat 2, the flat 3, the flat 6, and the flat 7. Flax, not flaxseed, but flat. Flat 7. Flat 2 is the most characteristic because these are all the scale degrees that have to do with natural minor. But this one right here kind of disambiguates it from that. It's like this is its special contribution. It's this flat 2. So if you have something like this, this has a very Phrygian sound. Almost has a Spanish kind of sound. Right? It's Phrygian. This is Lydian, I guess, triads. Oh, not triads. I don't like that word. I'm going to use trichords, although that has connotations too. Let's just call it a trichord. I think it's the lesser of two evils in this situation. So this is a Lydian trichord. This is a Phrygian trichord. Let's see if we can create an Aeolian trichord. Now, I would say this is the significant aspect of Aeolian. The fact that it's flat 6, right? That disambiguates it from this natural 6 when compared with its Dorian version, right? So you could have something like this. This is very Aeolian. It's emphasizing this note right here. I guess I can actually mark in the characteristic tones. That would probably be kind of cool. So these particular notes are really what are giving these chords that sound, because it has this characteristic tone. This is the 6th scale degree. This is the 2nd scale degree. It's treated in a certain way. This is the 4th scale degree. It's treated in a certain way, right? So there was a professor at SDSU. Sadly, I didn't get to study with him because he actually had a breakdown, and he left. But he was like, he's like a genius, and he wrote all these books in music theory and so meticulously. And it's like I've never seen music theory books so meticulously written. And he actually, I copied this from his book. And technically this is under copyright, but he probably won't know about it, so I'm just going to put this here for now. Even though this is on YouTube for all to see. I shouldn't have said that. Okay, well anyway, here we are. And he actually goes and he describes chords. These are all different chord symbols that you could use with these specific modes. So I went and I showed you very simple triads, but you can actually, this is a good Lydian chord. Very jazzy. These are nice to play, though. I would recommend just going through and playing these chords and thinking about the chord symbols, right? This is a D major triad over a C root. This is a polychord. Man, this guy was so cool. I wish I could study with him. They should make a movie about this guy. He wrote like 6 textbooks, and then he just vanished. But there's so many interesting voicings that you can kind of consider. So look at this. He said the same thing. Or I said the same thing as him, really, because I'm a student. Lydian characteristic, it has a sharp 4, right? Mixolydian. I guess this is Bolden, but the flat 7, I would think, is really the more salient scale degree. Well, I guess you can include the 4 as well. I would not think that the 4 would be so important, but I guess it. This all has a mixolydian sound. Doesn't that sound nice? It, like, you might think about this in the context of like regular tonal harmony. You might decide that, well, this is just like a sus chord that's going to resolve to a chord that's like in the key, and we don't have to worry. Like, we don't have to think about this chord so much. Or like, oh, this F sharp was accidental. It's a non-harmonic tone. Like, who cares about that tone? Well, it's beautiful to think about this as an intentional aspect of the music, right? It's beautiful to think about this as being like modally, like this chord is part of a mixolydian mode, right? That's another alternate way of thinking about it. Like classical music theory is kind of rigid in a lot of ways because it tries to put everything in a box. It's like, it's not a dominant motion, so it can't be anything important. So we'll just call it a non-chord tone, right? Instead, we're like, well, why don't we just call this a stable chord? Like this is its own thing. It's a beautiful thing, right? So what's interesting about these is it shows you all these chords, and it shows the chord symbols, and it's very beautifully illustrated. And you can kind of look through these and enjoy them. And so there's something to be said here that's very interesting. Any questions on any of this stuff? I know I've said a lot of stuff, but it's probably...
Yeah, I have one tiny question.
Sure.
In that first line, there's 2 chords that are written as D over C, but one of them is like slanted and the other is straight up and like straight one over the other. Is there any real difference between them, or is it just a formatting thing?
I believe that's a formatting thing. Why that would be represented this way versus the other way, okay, well maybe, okay, here's the thing. Here's one reason it could be different. He might have actually described it in this way, actually, now that I think about it. This guy makes no mistakes. He's very meticulous. Let's see. Well, actually, why would he call this one line of thinking is that perhaps this is more of a polychord than this, and he calls this a polychord, and he doesn't call these a polychord. So maybe a polychord is this notation versus this notation. This guy, also keep in mind, this guy like invented notation. He's so brilliant with theory. He's like, well, let's describe this thing. Let's describe that thing. But I honestly can't see any real difference between. Well, okay. This is saying this is the third of D. What is this?
Maybe is that to denote that the D is the top note in the chord? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It is represented as a polychord. It's a slash notation. So this D is this F sharp is the third of a D. The C Lydian characteristic. I'd have to ask. There's another curator of this content at SDSU. I'll have to ask him what his thoughts are this, because he teaches the sequence at SDSU, and I'll see, because I don't really see a big difference, but it's probably explained somewhere in this 1,000-page combination of textbooks. But yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. I'll have to get back to you on that. Any other questions? Well, I guess I can talk a little more if there are no questions. There are, I guess you can think about the circle. I watched an interesting video. There's all kinds of interesting perspective on this on YouTube, and I tried to distill it in my own way to make sense of it, because there's rigid approaches to this and there's more free approaches to this. And I think just consider all of them, because they all offer their own organizational opportunity. So one way you can kind of think about the different modes is through the circle of fifths. We kind of use this to kind of determine closely related keys. We took a larger segment of this circle. We kind of selected a larger, in order to look at the closely related keys for the pivot chord modulation stuff, we looked at this sphere, right? And if you go, if this is the starting key, you can go backwards counterclockwise in the circle of fifths to get a key that's closely related, and you can go further and you get a key that's a little further related, but still has some chords in common with the original key. Well, similarly, you could actually do this segment right here, and you can think about this as, let me look at what I wrote. You can visualize the related modes of a major scale by traveling to nearby keys on the circle of fifths. So if you go counterclockwise from C, you'll get to F. And how can I explain this? Well, Ionian and Lydian are kind of, F kind of connotes Lydian at that particular, that note of F in the key of C major connotes the Lydian mode. G, the note of G in the key of C major connotes the Mixolydian mode. The note A connotes the Aeolian mode. The note D connotes the Dorian mode. The note E connotes the Phrygian mode. The only one that's left out is this note B, which is the Locrian mode. So the inner circle are the minor keys. The outer circle are the major keys. Connotes, yeah, connotes. I don't know what I said. I might have said something. I might have made up my own word. Oh, connotes. Ooh, that's an interesting etymology to describe. I never thought about it before, but connotes basically refers to. It just means refers to, or means. I guess connotation means meaning. That's meta, man. What does meaning mean? Let's just look up the definition really quickly. It sounds like it could have a more cool musical meaning. Conveys. Conveys, yeah.
It means there's like an implied meaning beyond the literal meaning.
Yes. You might have thought, and I'm wondering if there's another connotation here with the word notes. I'm just looking for more meaning in this. Meaning in the meaning. So anyway, this, I don't want to confuse you, but you can watch this video if you want that kind of explains this. It was pretty cool. I'd watched some of it. I didn't watch the whole thing. But it basically talks about modal chord progressions at some point, and I'm going to talk more about those as well. In fact, there is a homework question about that. So if you want to answer that 5-point question of what a modal chord progression is, you could just copy and paste this in case you don't understand this. If you're really anxious to start doing your homework, you could look at this. Because we talked about using modes, how a single chord can communicate a mode, but we haven't talked about is how a chord progression can actually connote a mode. So like, for instance, I guess really quickly, since why not? Oh, I didn't put this here. Did I put this? Oh, I think I put it over. Oh, wait a second. Oh, okay. Let me just open the document to show you. Oyo Como Va. It's a great example of a modal chord progression, if you know that song. And basically what it is the following. I'm almost certain I put this somewhere. Where did I put this? On the one note. Well, it doesn't matter. Oye Como Va. What you have is the one, okay, I know where I put this. Will we go over modal progressions next lecture? Yeah, we're going to go over them probably for the remainder of the year because there's so many interesting features of it. There's only one homework question on it that's worth 5 points. It was kind of disproportionately weighted. I should have probably made it more points considering there's like 420 points or more points on the homework. But yeah, it's I had a section about key signatures and I don't know where it went. And I want it. And I guess it's not here. It's too bad. Oh, no, here. I put them over here. I don't know why. Did I? Oh, okay. Okay. Here we go. All right. Okay, so there's two schools of thoughts with modes and key signatures. Okay, I think we're out of time. All right, well, we did what we could. Let's just continue next time. Makes a page. I guess you could look at. Oh, okay. I never copied this. I guess I'm just going to talk out loud here. I'm going to give you a preview because technically there's a little bit of time between my office hours and class, and I guess I'll do some talking just in case you guys are really interested, and I can kind of stub my toe a little bit so I can be a little more fluid in how I explain this next time. Anyway, it'll give me more opportunities. So there's two schools of thought. Really, there's two schools of thought on modes and key signatures. And you could make the key of the key signature the tonic of the piece, which is the starting note of the mode. In other words, if you have an A minor, if your piece is an A Dorian, what key signature do you use? Do you use what key signature could you use? I guess you could think about you could use like an A minor key signature and make modifications, right? There's a big debate on this on Reddit, in case you're wondering. You could decide to use the A, because A Dorian is really close to minor, so you could use the A minor key signature and then just make modifications. Or I think the more standard way is by using the G major key signature, which is the parent scale of A minor, of A Dorian, is G major. So in this particular situation, this F sharp is cautionary. You could represent this in two different ways, I guess. By referencing the key signature of the parent scale, or just by referencing like the parallel minor or major of the mode, right? So with that being said, we have this modal chord progression. Oye, como va? Oye, como va? Da, 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 ba, da, da, da. Right? We're actually referencing the Dorianness of this through the chord progression. From the standpoint, it's not just one chord or one instance of the music that's really localized event that's really characterizing this Dorianness. It's actually the fact that this entire chord progression is kind of communicating this Dorianness. If you look at this chord and you look at this chord, you have this F sharp in here, right? This 4 chord, this major 4 chord, is really making it sound Dorian. Going from in other words, going from a minor 1 chord to a major 4 chord is a modal chord progression. It's a Dorian chord progression. Anyway, I'm not going to say any more. There's more I have to say about this, but I don't want to confuse you. And yeah, trust me, this confuses me. So anyway, let me stop the share. Well,